Welcome back to the floor of IAE 2952. My name is Paul Shelley. This is a floor tour where I'm taking folks, you can see over here live, who have joined us to walking them around the floor, to tell them about all of the different ships, the lore, what they are, the ships, what the ships are, what their purposes are, all of that stuff, and the companies that make them. We do this live every day during the IAE at 3 p.m. Eastern, so come join us live at twitch.tv/TheAstroPub or youtube.com/TheAstroPubLive. And remember, if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe, hit the like, hit the little bell icon so you know when these videos go directly up and when I go live. Both of those will help you out, because again, coverage all this week. With that being said, let's talk about Aegis Dynamics. This crew, all right. So that is a big ship. This is Aegis Dynamics Day. Aegis was founded in the early 26th century, in the early 2500s. And it was, how to put this? It was designed from Aegis Macrocomputing and Dynamics Systems. Both of these companies, Aegis Macrocomputing created computers for ship computers, and Dynamics Systems created what did they create? They actually built ships. They had production facilities for components and for ships on 6 different systems. They joined together in, I believe it was 2530, I believe. Yes, 2532. That's what it was, 2532. Because in 2530, humanity first encountered the Xi'an. I'm going to have to preface this to y'all. Humanity and the Xi'an did not get along very well. It didn't help that humans showed up and tried to terraform a planet that was already the Xi'an. They got captured. But then when humans, the fleet showed up to stare down the Xi'an fleet, the Xi'an in their negotiations were basically like, hey, give us maps of your entire system, every system you own. We want to know all of your jump points, everything. Or we continue to hold on to these captives. And the UEE realized that the Xi'an lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, so they could just wait this out if they wanted to. So that was the UPE at the time. And the UPE gave in and gave them the maps so they could get the people back. But effectively, humanity was outmatched. They could not fight the Xi'an in any way, shape, or form. They did not have the technological capabilities. So the UPE panicked and was starting to try to modernize their navy very quickly. So Aegis Macrocomputing and Dynamics Systems, they got together and formed Aegis Dynamics specifically to build military ships. That was their purpose. But unfortunately, they weren't able to do so before the first interstellar war happened, but not with the Xi'an, but with the Tevarin. During the first Tevarin War, they interviewed many pilots who were flying bombers, old bombers and civilian ships that were converted into bombers, to figure out what they wanted in a next-generation bomber concept. And that kind of feedback became the bedrock of how Aegis made ships. They talked to the experts who were using their ships to get their feedback to figure out what they're supposed to do, like what they should make. And as a result, they would take that feedback and incorporate it into their new designs. That would lead to their first ship called the Retaliator, which was super popular, very, very effective, and saved the life of one Ivor Mezer, who would eventually become the dictatorial imperator of the UEE, the new UEE, and had close ties with Aegis. So Aegis became the favored production company of the Mezers, and the Mezers, Aegis built most of the ships for the UEE, which is why we have so many ships today in Star Citizen that are from Aegis. The problem was that these ships were often used for repressing the populace. So they were, as I like to say, they were used for war crimes. Sometimes they were used for legitimate combat, but most of the time it was just war crimes. So they got kind of a bad rep. So when the Mezers were overthrown in 2792, Aegis was on the UEE's shit list. So they didn't like them. They lost a lot of their contracts. They didn't get any new contracts for a while, and Aegis was about to collapse until they realized that the public was buying their ships in surplus en masse because they were cheap. There were so many of them, it was easy to find replacement parts, and they were effective for what they did. A lot of people like to customize Aegis ships. You do custom jobs with them, and a lot of frontier militia used them because, cheap and easy to find. So they started to sell a lot of their old models directly from the factories to the civilian market, and that saved them. They pivoted towards the civilian market, and that saved their industry. Eventually, they kind of worked their way back into the UAE's good graces, but even today, they mostly rely on civilian sales. So that is Aegis. That's the reason why you'll see lots and lots of Aegis ships, and we'll talk a little bit about that change as we come through here. Let's start with the big Mama Jamba here, the Reclaimer. Come join me. Join me with the Claw.
Muted in Discord.
There you go. It should be fine now. All right. The Claw. The Claw is... the Reclaimer is known for its claw, but the Reclaimer actually doesn't have a lot of lore. We don't know when it was purchased or when it was built. I have a theory that when Aegis pivoted towards the more civilian market, they built the Reclaimer as their first civilian-oriented ship, because the Reclaimer first shows up in lore in 2922, having already existed for several years before that. That was the first real mention that I could find. So the Reclaimer is a salvage ship. It's not just a salvage ship, it's a salvage factory. This thing is designed to completely salvage ships up to capital class very quickly. And as a result, its main purpose is to cut, salvage, and process anything they can find in space. It is loaded with guns to protect itself because it's very valuable, and it's tough. As you can see from it landed, it's not really designed to do that sort of salvage on the planets, though. It's designed to do it in space. It's just far too large to land on planets, and it's very difficult to manage. But it's very popular even today with salvagers, just because of how effective it can be with a very small crew in comparison. I think maximum crew is something like 5 or 6 people, so it's fairly good for its size. From the biggest ship to one of the smaller ships, let's come over here and look at the Saber. So, the Saber is one of the latest ships. I think it is the latest ship, according to lore, built by Aegis Dynamics. It was built in 2945. There is some discrepancies because it was built for a competition where there's an exact same competition in lore that was like 15 years earlier, which was for the same purposes. So I think that there's just some mix-ups there, and this was supposed to end up being there, but they kind of haven't changed it around. So if that was the case, then this was going up against the F8 Lightning and the RSI Scorpius for the shot of being the next great main heavy fighter for the UAE. Now, the Saber did not win that out. It was developed under the title of the Dogfighter 3000. But they didn't care, because once they entered, they immediately started selling it to the public without having to care about the results. To kind of show you how much they had already pivoted. They submitted their entry and got chosen for the final 3 entries for the competition, but they had already started selling it to the civilian market because that's how they made their money. Now, the likelihood is that the Saber is a upgrade of a ship known as the Comet, which we'll talk about in a moment, which was one of the prototypes for all modern Aegis fighters. But this is a pretty beefy ship. It's a single-seater fighter. It has 4 size 2 gimbals. I believe these are size 3 fixed. It is designed with more stealth in mind. It does have some stealth components. And it is a little bit more nimble than your typical medium-heavy fighter. It's considered a heavy fighter, though in practice it's much more similar to a medium fighter. And it relies on its initial punches rather than overwhelming, tiny bits of firepower. Well, let's talk about the Comet. Come on over here. So this is the Saber Comet. Now, this is a limited edition version. Let me look up my notes real quickly so I can have the quick answer for the name of the person, because that's the... The person who this was built after was known as Kamor Dalyon, who was a UAE veteran of the First Varan War, a close friend of Ivor Mezer, and he was hired on. He was a fighter ace in the First Varan War, and he was hired on to help design the next generation of fighters. And the ship he helped develop was the Aegis Comet. Now, the Comet was never really, it was released and it was very effective, but it was very short-lived in its career. But with the Saber being the modern version of the Comet, the Aegis worked with Arena Commander to release a Masters of Flight series in honor of Dalion, to release a version of the Saber with his livery on it. So this is the livery he would use for testing the Comet, kind of a digi-camo with some blue on it. So that's what this is designed for. And the loadout is more of a unique loadout that's similar to what he would have used when he was testing it. With that, let's continue on with more ships from Aegis. Come on over. Alrighty, here we go. The bomber wing for the Aegis exhibit. Let's start with the old granddad of Aegis, the B-52 of Star Citizen, the Aegis Retaliator. Now, as I said earlier, the Retaliator is one of the first ships that Aegis ever produced. It was produced in 2944. Just to give you context for how old this ship is, when the first Retaliators were released, they did not even have shields. Shields were not a thing that existed on smaller ships, so ships smaller than even patrol ships. I think you had to have a massive capital ship to actually have shields during this time period. So this ship is over 400 years old. Now, that doesn't mean that this ship itself is 400 years old. Obviously, things have changed over time. But this ship is designed exclusively as a torpedo bomber, and it still does that role very well. It has an extensive amount of capacity. If we come down here, it has 2 bays worth of torpedoes, and I believe each bay holds up to 4 torpedoes, possibly even more. So that is an extensive amount of damage, especially considering that this ship can be equipped with antimatter torpedoes. Antimatter torpedoes are so destructive that a flight of Retaliators carrying antimatter torpedoes could blow up a small moon, and have nearly done so in the past. Now, because the Retaliator saved Ivor Mezer's life, it became really the poster child of the UEE. This was used on propaganda posters, it was used in recruitment ads, all sorts of things. So it's really, really well tied to the Mezers. And it's also, it was effectively used as a war crime ship. There are many, many cases of Retaliator bombers using cluster munitions and antimatter torpedoes on civilian targets that did not have any weapons or anything else like that. Just kind of arbitrarily striking where they wanted to. So Retaliator crews got kind of a bad reputation. But there is one squadron, Squadron 78, known as the Thundering Thorshoes, who helped change that mentality. Because at the end of the Mezer era, this is before the anti-Mezer revolution that overthrew the Mezers, they were ordered to bomb another civilian target. But the leader of the flight, when they got close, realized there's something off. There was no evidence of weapons fire. There was no evidence of any kind of military buildup. And so they contacted the site before the bombing it, warning them, hey, you better surrender or we're going to bomb you. And the response was, we're an agricultural and like a refugee center. What are you doing? And as they got closer and closer, they realized it was a civilian target. So they made the decision to disobey their orders, fired their torpedoes at a random asteroid, completely destroying the asteroid, hitting an entire squadron of Retaliators firing their antimatter torpedoes. Is a pretty, lots of white flashes. They got back and they were immediately arrested and set up for court-martial. But lucky for them, the anti-Mezer revolution happened and they were freed, which has kind of turned the Retaliator into the Retaliator cruisers being more of the held up as examples of the best parts of the UEE. Now, the thing about the Retaliator that makes it more interesting is, remember how I said that ship customizers like Aegis? This ship is the reason why. They would take the bomb bays out and they would replace them with a bunch of different custom modules to use as what they wanted to. Aegis, realizing this, has already released several modules for the Retaliator. You can buy models, and even you can buy them on the store even today. You can buy several entertainment or beds. You can buy additional cargo space, and you can even buy a dropship module. So there's a bunch of different modules you can use. Its modularity has helped keep it relevant even up to today. Now, from the oldest bomber to the newest bomber, let's look at the Eclipse. So, this is the Eclipse. The interesting story about the Eclipse is that it was built in 2930 under incredible secrecy. Why was it built in 2930? Well, to counter the Xi'an. Now, at that time, humanity and the Xi'an had been at peace for hundreds of years, for over 100 years. So, it was odd that the EUBE Imperator at the time had ordered this ship to be developed in secret and asked for Aegis to do it, but they did. It's never been used against the Xi'an, but this is, in classic Aegis fashion, a stealth ship that is designed to do stealth strikes, surgical strikes. It works fairly well for its role. Even today in game, it's a feared ship. If you just see a contact and you get a missile warning, you don't see a contact, it's probably an Eclipse that's locked onto you, hitting you from beyond visual range. So, or dang near beyond visual range. So it is a very scary ship, but that's all it really does. It's a torpedo ship. It's good at not being seen and hitting with torpedoes. But in 2945, or 2947, it was revealed through a Freedom of Information, like truth and information kind of request. I can't remember the exact name for Star Citizen. And as a result, it was sold to the public as well as through the Militia Mobilization Initiative. So you can pick that up today. All right, let's head on over to the next hall. All right. Here is the next part, the Vanguard wing. This is one of my favorite Aegis ships because it is also,
I'm in heaven.
It is the ship of the UAE Marines. Now, it's used by the Navy often, but there's a reason why it's often very well liked by the Marines. The A3G Vanguard was developed in 2730, I want to say, in the early 28th century, specifically to counter the Vanduul. It's big, it's tanky, it's heavy, and it's got a heck of a range. So it allows for squadrons of ships to be able to fulfill multiple roles that would usually require several capital ships. It's a lot easier to maintain 15 fighters than it is to maintain one Idris, and probably requires less crew, in fact. So the Vanguard's purpose is to explore and patrol long range, but its secret is that it's modular. All Vanguards have a internal component. We'll see it down under here. You scream down, you can see the little the bay right here. This bay can open up. These little latches can unlatch, and you can swap out in the field the middle module for something different. Now, that middle module allows it for it to become like this, for instance, is the Warden. The Warden variant is a heavy fighter. There are other variants as well, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But this modularity allows it to be used for pretty much any mission you need, which is why it's the favored of the UAE Marines, because they don't need a big fleet to do their operations. They just need 4 of these bad boys, and they can pretty much do any single mission they want to do. So speaking of those variants, beyond the Warden, let's look at the Sentinel. So this is the Sentinel. The Sentinel is designed just like the regular Vanguard, the Warden. These are all effectively the same ship with different loadouts and a different module swapped out. The Warden, or the Sentinel, is a e-warfare ship. It's designed as, to do Wild Weasel missions, to go in and disrupt enemy scanners and enemy AA sites ahead of any kind of attack and clear them out. Because it's long range, it can do that in front of fleets or in front of other flights of Vanguards. It currently does not have its e-warfare suite. It currently has an EMP on board, and most of its weapons are designed as disruption weapons rather than kill weapons. So I think these are all different versions of the giant what is it? Hurston tuning fork, the attritions, I believe. But all right, from this, let's go over to the other variants. All right, so this is the Harbinger. The Harb is the same as we've seen before. It is a version of the Vanguard, but the big thing about this one is that its center is actually a torpedo bay. It allows for size 5 torpedoes to be installed on the ship, turning this into a bomber, a fighter bomber. Size 5 torpedoes aren't great. They're not going to kill capital ships, but they can kill pretty much anything below a capital ship. And you would see in a marine operation, you'd have the Sentinels go out, fly, deal with the any kind of sensors or defenses early on. Then you would have the Harbs escorted by the Wardens to take out any heavy targets they need to. And lastly, coming in, we will see over here the Hoplite. The Vanguard Hoplite is designed with, instead of a missile bay or any other kind of components, this has swaps at the center for a troop transport. So come on in if you can. You can see there are 6 different seats, plus, so 6 Marines can be fully equipped in armor inside here, plus a variety of weapons, more weapons than there are Marines on this thing, so you can kind of carry whatever you need to, and drop this off into any hot zone. And the best part about this is that this ship can then loiter afterwards. It can stay and act as a fighter to help other help the troops that just dropped off, either as a ground support or as air support. So let's keep moving over here to the other ships of Aegis. All right, here we go.
Look, there it is.
This is the giant garbage can in the center and some great ships in the sides. Let's start with the garbage can. So, for those of you who are new, who may not know, I hate this ship. This ship is terrible in my mind for a lot of different reasons. One of which is because it simply does not have any lore. So, like the Reclaimer, it doesn't have any lore to it, so it's a little bit harder to judge. There are some references to it that it was an older ship that was around the same time as or was before the Valkyrie. And there's some other references that it's brand new. So, what the Redeemer is, the Aegis Redeemer is that it is at its core a gunship. It is designed to support ground targets and ground troops in an area. It has some ungodly amounts of firepower. There are 2 size 5 turrets, with each having 2 size 5 guns on them on the ship. Plus, the pilot can control these size 2 or 3 cannons here, and then there's an additional guns that can be on the sides that can be used by pilots or by gunners as well. So it just has guns to guns to guns to guns. And these engines are called the Vector Lock engines. They're an experimental engine design that Aegis has used. But this ship is designed not only to work as a gunship, it is designed to hold crew, so we can stay there for long distances. So it's got some decent range. It has lots of crew space, so you can sleep in it. It is a all-around good gunship. It's the only gunship we really have that's dedicated as a gunship. But that's about it. All right, from that to the Avenger. We'll talk about the Avenger. I think this is the Warlock, but we'll still talk about the Avenger and kind of go through it. So the Avenger. The Avenger was first released in the 2760s. It was designed as the medium carrier fighter for the UAE, and it did its job. It was very good at its job, but it was designed as a 2-seater medium fighter. But after the fall of the Mezzers and the development of the Hornet is just heads and shoulders above the Avenger. It's more maneuverable, it has better firepower, and so on and so forth. So the Avenger was taken out. However, the Avenger was picked up by the Advocacy as their main ship. So what Aegis has done after its time in service, they have removed the second seat of the Avenger and replaced it with a living quarters. So all Avengers have a living quarters or bed for longer range duration. So you have a lot of flexibility with the Avengers, and they're pretty cheap to build. The other thing that makes the Avengers unique is that their back cargo areas have been modified and are easy to modify. So let's take a look at some of these interiors here. So this is the Warlock. So this is a version of the Avenger, which has a giant EMP generator. That is a EMP generator. Do not climb in there. You will die. You will get hurt if you move too close. You got to be very careful. Otherwise, if you touch the sides, you will get hurt. Playing with fire there. So the Warlock is used by the advocacy and by civilians as just an EMP ship, as a denial weapon. It can be used to disable any ships that in an area or severely hinder ships. The other ship, that version, is called the Titan. And now the Titan is fairly famous for being the go-to cargo ship for all starter players and for new pilots in the verse. But it's probably most infamous for being the ship of Danny Solomon. Agent Danny Solomon of the Bremen system, SIC Special Agent in Charge Danny Solomon of the Bremen system, famously used this version of the Avenger, the Titan, that he called the Renegade. Why did he call it the Renegade? Because Danny Solomon was known as a shoot first, ask questions later kind of agent. He didn't really go out murdering, but he liked to fire his guns to let everyone know who's in charge. And he chose to not use the standard version, which is called the Stalker, which we'll talk about in a moment, because he didn't need the prisoner cargo pods. He needed speed. So he removed the cargo pods specifically to decrease the weight so he could keep up with the main kind of criminal in the Bremen system, which is smugglers. And he became known as a loose cannon because he liked to shoot. And because it became known that he removed his prisoner pods, a lot of people thought that he wasn't there to take prisoners. He was just there to kill people. So he scared the heck out of most criminals. And he leaned into his reputation by naming his ship the Renegade. So, as part of the Masters of Flight series with Arena Commander, Aegis released a version of the Titan known as the Titan Renegade in Danny Solomon's honor. So, let's kind of continue over to the next section.
Next two are the Titan and the Stalker. So I don't know if you want to just
the
switch
Stalker.
to the next area.
They're just going to go to Stalker. So the Stalker here. Here is the Stalker. So this is the standard variant you'll see most advocacy agents and bounty hunters use, which is the Stalker. Each of those are a cryo prisoner pod. You can put someone in there, and then they won't be able to get out unless you do this. To show you, you've closed it. You cannot open it again. Ah, you can't open it again. I guess they changed that. You used to be able to trap people in there entirely. But the idea is eventually you'll be able to put people in there and keep them on ice and keep them protected for as long as you need to. Which is what's made this very popular with bounty hunters as well. All right, then that's the Avengers. Let's move on.
The Stalker is upgunned from the standard Titan itself, so if you want,
it has the same. It has the same firepower, but it doesn't have the same.
Nope, it's actually got more, slightly more firepower. I was looking at it. The Stalker, at least,
it's no different. It's no different in terms of capabilities from the other ones. Here we have the last major one here. This is the Gladius and the Hammerhead. Let's look at the Gladius first. The Gladius is one of the most iconic ships of Aegis, simply because it is one of the older ones. This was first built in the post-Meser era in the 2570s or 2580s, and the story behind this is incredible because it is the first ship to have shields for its size. It's the first small ship to be able to carry a shield. This is because of captured Tavaran technology at the end of the First Tavaran War. So the Gladius actually has a lot of design cues and technology that we would find in the Talon that was eventually modified for human use. The reason why the Gladius exists at all is because of a ship called the Stiletto. Now, the Stiletto was the standard light fighter for the First Tevaran War and for the UAE for many, many years. But it was not very well, it wasn't very good. It didn't have a shield, but it was very maneuverable, but it didn't have a lot of range. Mostly it was used in the First Tevaran War for escort duty, and so it didn't get a lot of claim to fame. But the Gladius itself was created because of a famous event with the Stiletto. The Olympus, the UAE Olympus, crashed on a planet. Long story about an admiral flying his carrier too close to a gravity well and crashing his ship. But as a result, the ship went down. But the last remaining parts of the Olympus was the combat air patrol of Stilettos. And the Stilettos fought for hours trying to preserve and try to help any escape pods or ships fleeing the area to fight off pirates. They eventually died, and unfortunately were not successful, but the black box of their final stand made it back to the UAE, who then, the Mezzers then propagandized it. And so they decided to build a new light fighter using all this new technology they had as a propaganda coup. And the squadrons that got a hold of it managed to make it work. They really wanted to make these light fighters work. As a result, the Gladius lived well beyond what it was supposed to and is now still one of the best light fighters ever built by humanity. It is still used, though it is being phased out. And so as a result, there's a lot of Gladiuses and junkyards that from all over different eras. And that leads us to the variant that the Aegis has released, which is known as the Valiant. Let's go over here. So, the Valiant is a version of the Gladius, only in that it has some different weapons loadout and it has a livery. The livery is specifically Orion Defense Protectorate. This one's a little funky. But this livery is designed as a reference to Condi Hillard. Condi Hillard is the first human to ever shoot down a Vanduul scythe. She worked for Orion Defense Protectorate as a mercenary, and she did so by getting her Gladius, which she pulled out of a junkyard and upgraded and fixed up herself. She and her flight were patrolling an area of space in Orion right after the initial Vanduul raids to try to keep the area safe and keep a lookout for this new species that they found. On their way back, they just stumbled into a bunch of scythes who were on their way to attack their base. So they ambushed them, and Condi managed to squeeze off a couple of rounds and down one of the scythes before they knew were there. The rest of them scattered as a result. But in honor of the first human to ever kill a Vanduul scythe, the Masters of Flight series released the Valiant, which is her livery and weapons loadout for that encounter. Now, with that all being said, let's talk about one of the final ships we're going to talk about, which is the Hammerhead. Now, Hammerhead is the result of Project Monitor. Project Monitor was the goal of building a brand new patrol ship. The old patrol ship was known as the Gawain class. The Gawain class was aging and needed a retrofit. So they needed something that was able to serve as a bomber and fighter screen and also be able to patrol on its own in limited capacities. So Aegis came up with the Hammerhead. This thing has insane amounts of firepower. Each of these turrets possesses, I believe, 4 size 3s in their turrets. Maybe 4 size 4s. It's 4 size 4s. So 4 size 4s, and there are a total of 6 of them on this thing.
Yep. Not to mention 36 size 3
missiles. Size 3 missiles. Operated by the pilot.
Upgraded to, up to size 5. So you could actually have 8 size 5 torpedoes as well in this thing.
So this thing is a death machine. It requires a lot of people to operate it, but it is very good at what it's supposed to do, which is shoot down fighters and shoot down torpedoes as need be. It has been updated over the years, but the problem was that it was developed in 2770, and shortly after its first release, the Mezzers fell. So the UE had wanted nothing to do with anything Aegis, so they couldn't really sell more Aegises, more Hammerheads to the UE. But because of a technicality, they could sell them to the civilians because there was never a exclusive contract sold, kind of signed with the UE. So they were able to sell the Hammerhead to civilians, where it has been modified for many different things, including a solar observation platform and other uses for it as well. Private yacht, I think, is one. So these ships are pretty common in the First these days because they work pretty well as fighter screens. And there are a total of 4 different generations, each with slight upgrades, increased scanning, aerodynamic flaps, and then there was one that was, I think, better shielding. But overall, this ship is still pretty storied. There is actually a version 5 that exists, but it has not been signed. There's no contract that's been signed by the UAE military with Aegis. So they've tested it, they built it and tested it, but they haven't released it yet with no kind of confirmation on that one. With those are all the ships that are on the floor. Let's go look at the other ships, which are going to be coming to the floor soon, but not quite there. Let's go look at the holographic ones. All right, so we're going to go to the display hall next. We're going to move over to one of the most venerable ships in the UAE, the Nautilus. So the Nautilus is pretty old. It's over 400 years old. And it was developed after the First Tevarin War. The same way the Retaliator was developed, the same way every Aegis ship was developed. They talked to the people who were mine layers during the First Tevarin War. The First Tevarin War was a lot of ad hoc stuff because humanity wasn't ready for a war. So a lot of their ships were converted civilian ships into combat ships. And when they were trying to build a mine layer for the future, they interviewed a ton of mine operators, mine layer operators and veterans. And they all came up with the same discussion that they did not need as many mines as much as they needed precision numbers, like dropping them in very specific locations. That was much more effective and much more important than just dropping a boatload of mines. So they developed the Nautilus with that in mind. The Nautilus has been used for many operations. Most famous ones were the operations that it accidentally destroyed the High Hat gang of Tohill by accident. One of their mines found their way to the High Hat base because they were mining the Tohill asteroid belt. They also were critical in shaping the battlefield of the Battle of Centauri at the end of the Second Tevarin War, the thing that made Squadron 42 famous, because they dropped mines to force the Tevarin fleet to move in a very specific location towards where Squadron 42 would eventually defeat them and end the Second Tevarin War. They also, most recently, were famous for doing what they call a Hellkite run, where they ran in behind the Vanduul after the attack had started in the Battle of Oberon, and mined their likely avenue of retreat so that they would absolutely decimate and destroy, let none of the Vanduul survive, even the retreat, brutalizing the Vanduul retreat. Since then, it has been declassified and it has become more known and has been sold through the Militia Mobilization Initiative, but we don't quite have it yet. That was the other thing. This also has something called the Nemo drones, which is one of the reasons why it was declassified. It's also no longer a mine layer. It's also a mine recoverer. So a famous reporter died live on air due to an old mine that was in where their ship was. And as a result, they needed something to deal with a lot of these old mines that are left over from things like the Meser era. And Aegis developed the Nemo drone to use with their Nautiluses as a way of kind of like going around and recovering the old mines and deactivating the old mines. And also comes with a version of the mine which is just a turret that you can deploy. So all right, from there we've got the civilian, the most civilian of the Aegis ships, other than the Reclaimer, obviously, the Vulcan. So the Vulcan was developed at the end of the 26th century because the early UE had a problem. Most of the way that the UE was being maintained, the way that it was being taken care of was through fighter squadrons. And the issue with fighter squadrons is unless you have a fleet tender ship or some sort of base, it's very difficult to repair, refuel, and rearm fighters in situ. So the Vulcan was developed to do just that. It was designed as a small ship that could go along with fighter squadrons and refuel and repair them in the field, on the front lines. The idea being that they could use their 4 Bard drones to go out and do one or more specific tasks to help keep fighters in the fight just behind the front lines and then go back. However, the same reason why it was very difficult to keep fighters operating in the verse is the same reason why we have the same reason why civilians had a hard time doing so. So the United Wayfarers Club, which is an organization similar to, it's like Star Citizen's version of AAA here in the United States, the American Automotive Association. It's effectively an organization that wants to promote personal spaceship ownership and personal spaceship use. They had developed several civilian versions, kind of modified civilian ships to serve as refuel, repair, and rearm vessels on the move. But when Aegis was developing this, they asked Aegis if they could build them some Vulcans. But because it was a military contract, they had to get permission from the UAE. So Ivor Mezer said this is a great idea, and because I don't have to spend as much on infrastructure if you do this. So they did sell it to the United Wayfarers Club, and as a result, the Vulcan has been one of those kind of crossovers. You see them, they're in the military, but they're also frequently in the civilian, and they've been in the civilian mindset for hundreds of years as a roadside assistance ship, a space-side assistance ship. It's not quite in the game yet because they don't have a lot of those aspects in, but that will be in the game soon. All right, that is the Aegis Day. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, if you're watching this at home after the fact, make sure you join us live every day of the IAE at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to be talking about the ships on the floor, the lore, the roles, to give you an idea of what to expect on the floor. And if you did enjoy this, make sure you hit the like button, you subscribe for more of these videos, and of course, comment down below. I want to know your favorite ships as well. And with that all being said, like I say every time, hope to see you someday in the black.